Most investors look at the numbers first. And unfortunately, that sometimes is the only thing they look at. And there's so much more to a good deal than just the numbers. Look, my name is Chatto, and I've been a landlord for over 25 years. And after buying and managing hundreds of properties, there's a couple things that actually separate a great investment from a long-term headache. And a lot of people don't even think about it. These are the things that really you can't change. These are the things that no renovation can fix. So think about it. When you're buying a property, there's two categories. There's things you can fix and things that you're stuck with forever, the things you can't fix. So the things that you're stuck with are extremely important to consider when purchasing a property. So one of the things that you can't change, obviously, is location. You can't move a property from a good block to from a bad block to a good block. It's really not possible, right? You're not going to be doing that. So look at the area, the location. That's number one. That's huge. Sometimes a crappy property in a good area is better than a great property in a crappy area because you can't change the location. But that's like the one everybody knows. Location, location, location. That's what all investors and all realtors talk about. But there's a couple other things that you can't always easily change. For example, the floor plan. Sometimes properties have a really crappy floor plan. They have a bad layout, especially a lot of older row homes. And, obviously, depending on your market, depending on what's normal for your area, it sometimes can be an issue. I actually passed on a deal once. I looked at this property, beautiful area, big lot, single family house, and it was actually decent square footage. And I go and look at this property, and I felt like a giant. Right? I think it was 7-foot ceilings. I'm like, really? I'm going through and I'm like, wow. Like it felt so claustrophobic and so closed in. And what can you really do about that? Unless you knock the house down and start over. Like I couldn't buy that property because everybody that goes into it, every tenant that's going to rent there is probably not going to want it because the ceilings were so low. So that's like something you can't change. You can't change the floor plan. The other thing that's potentially something you can't change is whether or not it's a middle row or a semi-detached or a single family, detached house. That sometimes makes a big difference. A lot of times you're going to get a better appraisal value if it is a detached house. And a lot of times it's going to be more desirable to be a semi-detached end unit. And like the other thing is like if it's a middle row, like you have street parking, period. Like that's another thing that's not always easy to change is whether or not you have parking. Off-street parking can be a huge thing for rentals. And a lot of times people are always looking for that and it's not always available in some of these cities. So off-street parking, that's something you can't change. A lot of times I look at these properties, especially certain row houses, and they're one of these setups where there is a set of stairs right up into the second floor, right in the middle of the house, and there's a room on either side. It's a 2-bedroom house. There's a room on either side, and that's it. There's no bathroom on the second floor. So, like, it sounds like it's not that big of a deal, but, like, people do not want to get up in the middle of the night, walk down a set of stairs to the back of the house to go to the bathroom, and that's not easy to change. Right? So just something to keep in mind, like a good floor plan and setup like that is huge. And like another thing is sometimes depending on how the stairs go up to the attic, I've seen houses where the stairs just like go literally up in the middle of the attic. And when that happens, you're like splitting up the attic in such a way, it's like hard to put stuff up there. It's hard to use the space. It's not conducive to livable space, usable space. So it's like, okay, these are things you can't change. Like I said, the ceiling height. Another big thing that I look for a lot when possible is a first floor laundry. If you have laundry on the first floor, that's much more desirable. People don't like going into the basement, and especially if it's an older home and the basements aren't beautiful, people just don't want to go down there to do laundry, and to have the laundry on the first floor is sometimes huge. And then especially like, hey, if you're really getting fancy, you have it on the second floor where all the bedrooms are, but that's another story. The other big thing that's really, really hard to change, especially with row houses, but also on detached houses. Like, what do all the neighbors look like? Especially on a row house, if you are attached to a property that has fire damage, that's vacant, that's dilapidated, and you're attached to that property, you're going to have a couple issues that you may not have thought of. Number one, your insurance company is going to drive by there and say, wow, this property is attached to a vacant house. This is a extremely high risk scenario. I learned this the hard way. I had a property that we had purchased, and the numbers made phenomenal sense. The numbers made phenomenal sense, right? We bought a 5-unit property, and we picked this property up, and it was a good deal, but it wasn't in a great neighborhood. We were like, okay, we know the town. It's not the best neighborhood, but okay. But it was attached to a vacant property. So, long story short is, once the insurance company gets wind that this property is attached to a vacant property, right, that just made it like our insurance went through the roof. The amount of money we were paying for the insurance, because their fear is like, hey, somebody's going to break in there, right? Somebody who's homeless is going to break in there. They're going to want a place to stay. They're going to want to try to get out of the cold. They're going to be cold, right? Then they're going to try and get some heat going. Then they're going to be they don't have heat in this vacant property, right? Remember, you'd be using a kerosene heater or something to try to keep warm, and then it gets knocked over and the whole place goes up in flames and there's a big fire. So again, it just makes it really difficult when you are attached to a property that's dilapidated. Another property I looked at and I passed on, I go and I look at this property and the pictures are beautiful, and it was an area that I was learning, so I was deciding, hey, do I want to buy this property? And what I did was I jump on Google Street View, and while all the properties were detached, I go on Google Street View and I'm like, wow, look at this house across the street, completely falling apart. Look at the house next door, falling apart. Look at the house on the other side, falling apart. Everything was falling apart. The whole, I drove down the street on Google Street View, and I would say that at least 60% of the houses were dilapidated and falling apart. I'm like, okay, great. This guy bought this property, completely renovated. It's beautiful in a pile of crap. I'm like, I don't want this, right? So like, these are the things that you can't change, and it's important to pay attention to things like what's attached to your property, because it's going to make a big difference in desirability and a big difference in insurability, desirability and insurability. So that being said, on the other side of it, I wanted to kind of highlight a property that we purchased that was actually in a really good area. It was actually a couple doors down from the mayor of the town, right? So it was a good area. And we bought this property, and the seller was a hoarder, right? So we were able to get a good deal on it. We completely renovated it. We purchased this property in 2017. It is now 2026, right? And because it is a nice property, because it's in a nice area, because it has a backyard, because it has off-street parking, right? Because it's a semi-detached, all these things add together. That property has had the same tenants for 9 years now, right? We have not had a turnover at that property. Since we've got it, it's just cash flowed, right? And we've been increasing the rent slowly as we go, and it's been a phenomenal deal because it checked all the boxes. It was really a good property. And we actually paid more for that property than we did for a lot of others in the same portfolio of houses we were buying at that time. But then also, at the same time, we bought another property, and it was less desirable in the fact that it was a middle row, right? So it was a row house with attached properties on either side. It was, like I said, the 2-bedroom with no hallway, just steps go up. There's a bedroom on either side. And because of that, and because it's a row house, there's no off-street parking. And while, yes, you can find a tenant who's going to live there and they're going to be there a long time, we've had, in that particular property, a lot of turnover. We had the tenants that came with the property when we purchased it. Okay, great. They were there for a while, and of course they got behind, because whenever you buy properties with tenants, you don't know what you're getting. Of course, they got behind. They moved, they got evicted. They got kicked out. We renovated the property, and since then we've been through, I think, 3 turnovers. And both these properties we purchased about the same time. But the one property, which is less desirable, we've had 3 turnovers, and the other property, which is more desirable, we've had 0 turnovers. So it's just something to think about. Like, there is a cost that you need to factor in to stuff that you can't see, like, the desirability of the property, the area of the property, and just like things that make people want to stay there, right? If you have a property that has a driveway when most of them don't, right? When it's time for your tenant to leave and they start looking for another property, they're not going to find one very easily. And the ones they find are probably going to be a lot higher in rent than yours because they've been living there for a while, and you're going to end up with tenants that are there for a long time. So that's just something to keep in mind. So just to recap really quick, right? The numbers matter. The numbers are really important, but that's only a starting point. There are some things that you just can't change, right? You can, but it's really hard sometimes to change a floor plan. It's really hard to add parking when there's nowhere to put it. It's really hard to change houses that are attached to your property but don't belong to you. Vacant properties in the neighborhood, vacant properties attached on the one side, like all those things can't be changed and can really be a factor in not wanting to buy a house where otherwise the numbers make sense. And then also, like, local government. There's 2 local municipalities that I won't touch. I won't even go near them because they are just so difficult to deal with. They are just constantly writing up summons for stupid things, and constantly just making your life as a landlord hard. And guess what? I'm not going to deal with it. I'm too old for that. But obviously, you can see in some of our previous videos, I did a video, like a 10-minute way to evaluate a property in less than 10 minutes to kind of see if it's a deal. And I've also gone through a lot of numbers and a lot of different properties in a lot of my videos. So go check those out. Obviously like and subscribe. All that being said, I'm actually offering an opportunity if you want to go to my website, Chat with Chatto. There's a link there, and you can actually book a chat with Chatto and have a conversation with me. I'd love to talk to you and see if there's any way I can help you. And also, we're going to have on our website, there's a link for you to download if you already have a property. It is a landlord checklist. When you go to a property that you own and you do a walkthrough, it's a whole checklist. You keep these in your bag, and when you go to a property, you pull it out and you go through it, and it helps you spot preventative maintenance issues that you need to handle, stuff that's going to prevent service calls, and allows you to save trips, right? Because you're going to be at that property. You check everything out while you're there. It takes you 10 minutes, and now you don't have to take a 20-minute drive back out to the property for something stupid. So that's something else that I'm giving away for free on my website, chatwithchatto.com. I'd love to see you over there. And like I said, like and subscribe, and appreciate your hanging out all this time and listening to me blabber. And that being said, I'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Chat with Chatto.